Good morning. My name is Jarek Langer. I am a second-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, part of the Sloan research papers team for the conference. It is my pleasure today to introduce Keith Goldner and Nick Bonaddio, who will be presenting on From Idea to Revenue, the life cycle of analytics. Just a couple details on the presentation. So we're going to have about 20 minutes for the presentation and 5 minutes for Q&A afterwards. Please raise your hand and I will get you the microphone. Please just speak loudly into the mic. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Keith and Nick.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Bonaddio. I'm the CEO of numberFire. This is Keith Goldner, the chief analyst at numberFire. First things first, I'd like to thank MIT for inviting us to be here. It's really exciting for us to be given the opportunity to present at the conference in which we first got together as a company. I have to say that I'm surprised as many people are here at 9:30 to hear us speak. I don't know if that speaks well to what our company is doing or perhaps the less interesting panels that are going on otherwise, but at the very least, thank you guys for coming. About numberFire. So I hope some of you at least have heard of what we do. If not, then I'll give you guys at least a 30-second example of what we do, and then Keith will go into specific examples of our analytics. So we think of ourselves as being the next generation sports analytics platform. That's very sort of startup-y, very buzzwordy. I actually hate it, but for the sake of talking to investors, you actually kind of roll that out as a bit of a trope. So what we do is we try to take the Moneyball style analysis that sits inside our front offices everywhere and bring it to the common sports fan. So I have a thing that I use called the dad test. My dad is a 7-year-old dude back in Pittsburgh, doesn't really understand math all that well, doesn't understand analytics. And what I want to do is make sure that my dad, when he's thinking about the Steelers or the Penguins, has a couple things on a daily basis that tells him a little more about the team or how they played last night or how they're going to play. So what the system does is it takes in your regular statistic, produces advanced statistics and analytics about understanding what's happening, what's already happened, and what's going to happen. We were sort of founded with two unique stories, which I'll share real quick. I was on the TV show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with Regis Philbin. I ended up winning $100,000. I quit my job the very next day, and I started numberFire. So I'm probably the only person that's speaking at MIT that can honestly say they dance with Regis Philbin. And if you've ever seen Regis Philbin, like he's like 5'2", and I'm 6'5". So it's good TV, and it's on YouTube. So if you have like half an hour to kill later at the hotel, go look up me dancing with Regis. It's a pretty good scene. As far as MIT, when we first came here, it was just me, and I was trying to find as many engineers as I could. So I got the job book, I parsed through it, and basically did a search for everyone who went to a nationally elite university, the MITs of the world, and said they had PHP skills. I interviewed about 15 people and ended up hiring this guy. So for any of you who are looking to hire people, this is the best place to do it. Cool. So why did I start the company? I mean, the idea was pretty simple. I mean, I'm a math guy, I'm a sports guy. This is essentially my dream company. One of the problems was, I think, I'll give you guys a quick example. So I'm a really big fantasy football guy. I'm in a fantasy football league with my friends, my old frat brothers from college. But I'm also a math guy. And so I want to know with some level of certainty, some level of accuracy, who should I start on a week-to-week basis. Part of the problem, though, is a lot of the news sources, the ESPNs and the Yahoos and the Bleacher Reports of the world, they still give me a lot of qualitative content. So if I'm trying to make an actionable decision, something that is important to me, I don't necessarily feel comfortable with a whole lot of opinion and very qualitative analysis as my decision points. So here are sort of 3 headlines I took from 3 different media sources. Super qualitative stuff. The bottom one is actually, because I sort of love to bite the hand that feeds, that's from ESPN this year. And this is kind of an example of the kind of stuff I hate, right? If I'm trying to make an informed decision, these are kind of information and bullet points that just drive me crazy. If the numbers are there, the data is there, there's more information being calculated about sports now than ever before. There's terabytes of information being calculated about every single game. So unless you're doing something smart with it, unless you're building out a system which takes all this data and mines it effectively and brings it to the common sports fan, they're really doing them a disservice. And so what's going on is the fans are getting smarter and there's more data being calculated while the type of content that's being created stays exactly the same. And that creates a huge advantage for companies like us to go in and say, hey, sports media doesn't have to be stupid. It doesn't have to be 10,000 Bleacher Report slideshow articles. It could be good stuff. And that's kind of what we do. And I'll hand it off to Keith to tell you a little more specifically about some of the examples of the kind of analytics we calculate.
numberFire. And Nick's actually being really modest. He got onto Who Wants to Be a Millionaire by answering a question about Twilight. So definitely a Twilight expert here. But a little bit about my background. I previously worked for several NBA franchises as well as at ESPN. So my background is really on the team side of things. And what I kind of want to talk about is how all of our analytics are really grounded in the same mentality as the way that teams think, front offices think, as far as what's going to help a team win. Because when you're working in the media or working in academia, a lot of the times you're just looking for really interesting things as opposed to stuff that's actually actionable and going to help teams win. So we start at that team level and really build up from there to create tools and content to really empower smarter decision making in general. So to give you an example, I'm going to talk about football because there's not that much football talk at this conference. And our statistics are really drastically different from what you'll find in the everyday box score. And the best way to talk about this is to give an example. Normally what you find in the box score is yards. So say you have a 3rd and 12 Green Bay Packers on their own 27. Aaron Rodgers passes to Jordy Nelson for 10 yards. It's 4th and 2 now. They're at the 37. They're going to punt the ball. But in traditional statistics, you see 10 yards. That's pretty good on one play. But using our statistics, we use something called expected points because not all yards are created equally. Every situation is different. Every situation is unique. So using expected points, we can tell you at any given down distance to go in yard line, how many points a league average team would score. And before the play on the 3rd and 12, it was negative 0.44, and afterwards it was negative 0.37, so there's really not much of a change. They're still not expected to score next. The opponent, who I think was the Cowboys in this case, is expected to score next. So not really a great play because they have to punt. So here's a second example. You have 3rd and 2 on the Dallas 45. Aaron Rodgers completes it to Randall Cobb for 4 yards. 4 yards versus the traditional 10 yards. The first play in our traditional statistics looks 2.5 times better than the second play. But we know that the second play was much more impactful. It converted to a new set of downs, increased their chances of scoring dramatically, and again, we can quantify just how much it increased their chances of scoring. Before the play, they were expected to score 1.41 points. After the play, 3.56 points, which increases their net expectancy by 2.15 points. So again, we can really quantify how big of an impact that 4-yard play was, and it was much bigger than the 10-yard play given the situation. So again, everything in football really is situational, and it needs to be evaluated in that sense. And that way you can really understand teams and players better, and generally your statistics will be more predictive. Now, to create this expected points model, the main way to do it is just empirically. You look historically at all situations, how much on average teams have scored. So 1st and 10 from your 20 might be worth about 1 point, whereas 1st and goal from the 1-yard line is going to be close to 7 points because you're virtually guaranteed to score unless you're maybe the Seahawks. But the way that we do it is the problem with that is you get some really rare situations. And so if you're just using empirical data, you need to be able to smooth out over those situations. So we use something which has been talked about off and on at this conference called Markov chains and Markov models. And the math behind it can be pretty complex, but the general concept is pretty simple, which is in a Markov chain, if you want to know what's going to happen next, you're trying to predict, for example, how the drive is going to end, all that matters is your current situation. So if you have a 1st and 10 from your own 20-yard line, it does not matter if the previous play was a kickoff for a touchback, a punt for a touchback, a conversion on 3rd and 5 from the 15. All that matters is you have that 1st and 10 now from the 20-yard line, and that's going to inform what happens next. So we can tell you the probability of going from any state, any down distance to go in yard line to any other state in a football drive. And then we can extend that to then predict the probability of the drive ending in a touchdown or a turnover or any number of ways. And recently we actually expanded this to an entire football game Markov chain to create win probability model. And that's really valuable, again, on the team level because it's really helpful for making smart decisions. And win probability in football, can be used for lots of things. The biggest thing that everyone always talks about is deciding whether to go for it on 4th down or kick a field goal or punt. That's what it's most commonly used for. It can also be used to decide whether you should challenge a play, whether you should call a timeout, accept a penalty, just a short list of the couple of things that it can be used for. And so we recently launched this numberFire Live app that has our entire suite of analytics. We launched it for the Super Bowl. So while you're following along during the game, you can see the expected points on the drive, how it's progressed, the probability the drive ends in any number of ways, and the win probability and how each individual play affects that win probability throughout the game. And we're actually building something very similar for March Madness, where you'll be able to follow along with advanced analytics during the entire tournament. as well as win probability for every game. And so we don't just do football. We do lots of different sports. College basketball, March Madness is coming up, so that's a big one we're doing right now. And again, we start at the same level that front offices and teams do, which is we're trying to figure out what helps these teams win. So we use stuff like Dean Oliver's 4 factors, which are the things most predictive in winning in basketball. And then we go through rigorous opponent adjustment, because in college basketball, where there's 351 different teams all playing different schedules, opponent adjustment is a really big factor, especially when you're getting into the tournament, when you have these teams who have never really played each other and you need to be able to compare them on a one-to-one level. So we start at this team level, build up these tools so that we can then have predictive capabilities for predicting who's going to be in the tournament, or once the tournament field is set, predicting who's going to go the furthest, how far different teams are going to go, and then from there creating tools like optimal brackets for your March Madness selection. And that can vary based on your pool size due to game theory and optimization, because if you're in a really large pool, you can look at stuff like population trends, and that's going to have a huge effect on who you should be picking to get your biggest expected value. Similarly, another space that's huge right now is daily fantasy sports. So we start again at the team level, understanding these teams and players in order to project out their performance, and then we take our projections along with the constraints from the different websites and the salaries, and we generate these tools like this optimal lineup generator. So you can basically put in any constraints that you want. So say you really want Russell Westbrook in your lineup, you don't want any of the Philadelphia 76ers, sorry to Sam Hinkie, and then you can immediately generate the top possible lineup for that given night using our optimization algorithms. Similarly, we just launched another tool for the more avid fantasy player, custom lineup combinations, where you can say you know every single player you want to put into your lineup, but you don't know how to combine them. So you might have 5 point guards and 2 shooting guards and 3 small forwards. You can put them all into this tool, and then it will immediately generate the top possible lineups for you, ranked by their projections. So not only does it help you put those lineups together if you might not know how to fit the pieces together, but it also allows you to have all these different options so that you can kind of diversify your risk and make sure you're not overly exposed to one player or another. So again, we kind of start at the team think level, what helps the team win, and then from there, using those analytics, we build out tools and content to really empower smarter decision making across sports and fantasy sports in general. I'm going to hand it back to Nick to talk a little bit more about the business side of things again.
Thank you. One thing that's been interesting about Keith is that not only is he smarter than me, he's also a better speaker than I am, which really makes me feel bad about myself. So nice job, Keith. Yeah. So going back to like how we started the business, when I started, it was just me. It was me for about 1.5 years or so, drinking liters of Red Bull at a time and eating truckloads of ramen. And I'm just going to just walk you through sort of like how we grew from where we are now, or from back then it was just me to now we have 12 employees. We work with a variety of companies. And if any of you out here have ideas of this is how I would start a business, or maybe you've got a cool statistic or a cool product in mind that you want to go build, I'll try to give you some relatively practical and helpful tips to kind of get it off the ground. The first thing I would say is you want to start with one thing. I think a lot of analytics companies try to be super broad. They want to provide a whole bunch of services to teams or leagues or whatever, and that's really the wrong way to approach it. When it's just you or just a small team, what you want to do is be laser focused on one specific use case and really, really dominate that. From there, you can grow and grow and grow and grow. But for us, we started with football, and we specifically wanted to solve the problem of fantasy football. How do we bring Moneyball to the fantasy football consumer? And once we did that, it opened up a lot of doors, because people naturally thought, well, geez, if I can use this for fantasy football, why can't I use this for March Madness? Or why can't I use this for basketball? Why can't I use this for whatever else? And I think that, if you're starting out, especially if you're bootstrapped or you don't have funding, really the best thing to do is find a very small use case. Not small in the sense of a market size, but small in terms of like, this is something that I can focus 100% on and make sure I have it right, and then go from there. I think that's overall the best strategy. Next thing I would say is, it's really all about distribution. And so if you're starting out, one of the things that we did, or I did back in the day, was I literally would cold email all the ESPN writers and be like, hey, Matthew Berry, hey, Will Carroll at SI, hey, Christopher Harris, I want to help you guys. tell me whatever you want to know. Like if you're going to write about Terrell Davis, you want to write about Peyton Manning, let me know, and I will feed you all the stuff I could possibly give you about Peyton Manning. I want to make your article better, and I'll do it for free. All I ask is that you just cite us and say, hey, this is powered by numberFire. And that was actually a super, super effective tool, because not only did it give distribution, the kind of stuff we were doing, now our name is associated with ESPN, our name is associated with guys like Matthew Berry, but it forms an internal champion. So in a year from now, 2 years from now, when we're trying to talk to someone in the corporate side of ESPN, now Matthew Berry is going to bat for us because we work with him already, and he likes our stuff, and it's a really, really important thing. Now, legend of the 10x engineer. So I think there's sort of a trend going on holistically in the startup world towards startups being super, super engineering heavy. Like you got to have the best engineers to succeed. And let me just tell you from my experience, that's absolutely 1,000% true. A 10x engineer basically means that a good engineer, an A+ level engineer, is essentially analogous to a 5-star recruit. The 5x engineer will do 5 times better than an average engineer. The 10x engineer will do 10x better. And it's not necessarily that he'll work 10x the hours or work 10x harder. It means he'll push the product forward 10x as much. And so when you're really starting out, the first key hires that you do, specifically on the engineering side, will have huge ramifications on the rest of your company's life cycle. And so I'm one of those people that definitely believes that engineering is the right way to go. Go heavy on engineering before you hire anybody else. Save possibly a lawyer, just in terms of getting your stuff off the ground. But yeah, I mean, engineering is really where the key value is, because the 10x engineers, if you find them, really give you a huge advantage, mostly in relation to the older media companies, the dinosaurs in the space. I don't want to necessarily name any companies specifically, but these companies don't innovate. They can't find those 10x engineers because the best, most badass engineer doesn't want to go work for these legacy media companies. And so, when you go to the startups and go look at the pitch competition, those where the 10x engineers are, because they've seen the Facebook movie, they've seen what Uber is doing, they know the upside is with startups. And so, if you are going to do it, don't be afraid of the big companies. Don't just think like, oh, ESPN is going to kill us, because they're not, because they don't have the engineers to go and do it. But sort of on the flip side of that, if you don't grow like a Facebook, you don't grow like a Uber, that's okay. There's sort of this myth of startups that everyone who starts one is going to become filthy, filthy rich, and that's just not true. I mean, Facebook is an outlier of an outlier of an outlier of another outlier. I mean, it's such a fractional outcome that if you don't become a millionaire and just happen to have a nice lifestyle business, that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's better to just go into it and say, you know what, like this is something that I want to do because I love it. And I love sports, this is my dream job. That's the right mentality. And if this happens to make you rich, then, mazel tov. The right way to do it, in my mind, and kind of going back to what I did, is you can't really look at it in terms of binary outcomes of like, I'm here, and the final outcome is me sunning on the beach of Saint-Tropez. It's more of an iterative step. And so the way we want to do it is finalize that vision of, okay, in 5 years, this is what I want to be. In my case, let's say I want to go sunning on the beach of Saint-Tropez. Then I'll sort of create this ladder of each rung, I'm moving up the ladder closer to my goal. So the first rung of that ladder would have been to get a deal with ESPN. And maybe the second deal was to work with Yahoo. And the third rung was to hire a bunch of badass engineers. And when you break down this larger holistic goal into smaller chunks, now you feel like you got some momentum. You got some entropy moving towards that common goal. And as you're moving up that ladder, you have to find some growth vectors there. So revenue is a good place to start. You always want to have at least some part of your mind focusing on how do I get money in the door? How do I prove out this concept? How do I prove to everyone that people are willing to pay for this? In the absence of that, there's always VC funding. There's an entire ecosystem around sports and VCs. A lot of VCs are huge, huge sports fans. So specifically like Stanford and Penn and Harvard and all those schools. So if you just feed them literal statistics about the Stanford basketball team or the Harvard football team, they'll love you for that. So that's just a one way to get in the door with that. But there's sort of one thing I try to tell people a lot when they ask me about the mechanics of a startup. I think a lot of analytics people will tell you that there's no such thing as hustle, there's no such thing as luck or being clutch. But in business, it's completely opposite. There's no one singular thing that's more important than hustle. And by hustle, I mean just, Actually, I'll tell you a great story. So 3 years ago, me and my business guy at the time were here at MIT, and Mark Cuban was over there looking at some of the research papers. And we were trying to devise a way of how we're going to talk to Mark Cuban, because Mark Cuban's like the man when it comes to sports and tech. And so he was walking around the semicircle, and we literally pretended to be looking at our phones, and we're like, la, 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 la. And we like walked him into a corner where he couldn't escape us. And that was a way for us to get in front of Mark Cuban. Like, even if it was annoying and like probably pissed him off a little bit, at least we like did something to go put ourselves in front of Mark Cuban. And so that may be not the best example of hustle, but that's the kind of like stupid crap you have to do like sometimes, because you got to get yourself out there, you got to bootstrap, you got to really, really work. And that's the kind of stuff, like those sort of small incidents, are the kind of stuff that really turn a business from 0 to 1 and 1 to 2 and so on. So I think that's all I have. I have to answer more questions either from the business side of how we grew or the analytics side of what actually we do. And I'm coming in with literally 3 seconds left in the half hour, so fantastic. And yeah, thank you guys for coming.
Awesome. So we have about 5 minutes for questions. So if there are any questions, please raise your hand and I will get you the microphone. Oh, awesome.
When you guys are trying to differentiate yourselves from other analytics companies, how often or how much do you find that people actually care about something like model accuracy versus the entertainment value of the writing? And do you see that importance changing?
That's a good question. Yeah, how we think about how we differentiate, we're one of the few analytics companies which are mostly based on consumer. I think a lot of analytics companies like your StatSyncs of the world are mostly based on the enterprise. So they'll work with teams and leagues and broadcasters. We're trying to go after the common fans. That's sort of how we differentiate ourselves. As far as the way people think about differentiation inside of a specific sector, whether it's B2B or consumer, yeah, I think accuracy is certainly a part of it. I think a larger part of it is actually design. Because when it comes to analytics, you can't just give someone like a spreadsheet and be like, here, parse this. It's figuring out how to present that information to the user, how to break it down, how to build infographics, how to write content around it, and so on. So it really, comes to a point where it's, as long as you met some minimum threshold for accuracy and minimum threshold for competency as far as your data, then it really becomes a design question of how do I package this up in a way which is most attractive to the people who want to use it. And I think that when you look at the more successful analytics companies, it's the ones who figure out a way to distill it down better than the other ones.
And it's the same problem that teams face, which is they have to translate the information to some people who don't necessarily understand it. So it goes through the same design process. How can you translate these complex mathematical concepts into stuff that's actionable and consumable?
Are there any other questions?
Come on, I got 10 minutes. Yes, I can dunk. Two-handed though, I have small hands.
Hi, I was just wondering, are you suggesting people should back you into the corner of your phones like you did to Mark Cuban?
You know what, if someone did that, I'd be like, you know what, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to make an ass of yourself to meet me. So yes, if you guys want to run me into a corner or lock me in the elevator or whatever, I'll be moderately perturbed in the abstract sense, but I will appreciate your hustle. So. I just walk myself in a corner with that. It's going to be...
Okay, we actually have time for just one more final question.
Help with tomatoes or something.
Just wondering, I always think the NCAA is a crapshoot. How do you guys do every year? Do you do really well?
For a crapshoot, we do pretty well. But yeah, obviously when you have one game and done, the probabilities and the variance are huge. So yeah, I would say for a crapshoot, we do well.
Yeah, what's funny about March Madness is that there's really different strategies depending on the pool you're in, right? If you're in a pool with 10 people, your strategy should be profoundly different than a pool of 10,000 people. So if it's 10, then you're probably going chalk for the most part. maybe you have one or two teams that you think are, oh, like they're better than what the perception is. But if it's like a 10,000 pool, then you got to just basically go with the super high variance teams. Like you got to pick a bunch of upsets. And I think a lot of people sort of miss that when they think about how they form out their brackets. I think like everyone, like even the most advanced analytic system is probably going to have Kentucky winning this year. I know Adam up front is an Arizona fan, so he's probably unhappy I said that. But yes, so there is sort of like a, even the best systems are just going to, in a case like this, they're just going to pick Kentucky like everybody else. So in a 10,000 team pool, you're probably better off not picking Kentucky. So it's just one of those things where I think when you break up into different pools with different scoring systems, you kind of have to be a little creative the way you think about it.
Please join me in thanking Nick and Keith for their presentation.